Entitled neighbor thinks he can wander into my back garden when he wants. Going to try and set the scene a bit here. My house backs onto a number of flats. I have a little terrace garden out the back that is linked to my property. Below that terrace is a small patio area that is linked to the flats, which they can get access to by their own back door. There are then steps up to my area which are gated off. I also have a locked gate that allows access to the terrace garden because I live on a main road. A few months ago, the flat behind me had a problem with their plumbing, and the drain behind was overflowing with literal shit. Obviously an extremely nasty situation for everybody. When the owner of the flats, we will call him T, asked if he could come round the back and check the drain, of course we said yes because we're not total assholes. After he checked the drain, he said he'd need somebody to come out, check it and drain it. We agreed but made it clear we would need to be made aware before it happened as stipulated in our rental agreement with the letting agent. He said fine, and we got notice before any work was done so we could ensure our gate was unlocked. I thought that was the end of it, and boy was I wrong. A few weeks later, I was at home and heard my front gate open. I found it odd because my boyfriend wasn't due home from work for a little while and nobody knocked on the door. The door to my house is immediately next to the gate, so it's seconds between the gate opening and a knock. When the gate went a second time, I looked outside to find T walking away. Obviously, he had entered my property without my consent. Wanting to give him the benefit of the doubt, believing that he just wanted to check the drain one last time, I didn't say anything about it. Just letting it slide. A couple of days later, my boyfriend, who had given him his number to deal with the drain issue, got a phone call from him, saying he needed to gain access to the back of our property and why did we have our gate locked. As my boyfriend said, we were both at work and neither could come home to deal with his request, and if he needed something to speak to the letting agents, he just hung up. I spoke to my boyfriend, and we collectively came to the decision that we would keep the gate locked at all times, even when we were in, because I didn't feel comfortable him just walking into my property as and when he felt like it. And he did not like that. The next time he tried to get in, my boyfriend was at home, and I was at work. When he opened the gate, he got a stream of abuse from T, asking why we had locked the gate when he had permission to have access to the back when he wants, and there is a note in our rental agreement to state this. He threatened to get solicitors on us if we didn't leave the gate open or give him a key to get in when he wanted. It was here, he said, because he had renovated the house he deserved to gain access on his terms, even though he wasn't our landlord. My boyfriend just told him to take it up with the letting agent if there was a problem and shut the door on his face. When I got home, I combed through my rental agreement, and there was no such note in place. The only thing I could find about access was we required 24 hours notice for any work or access to the property, including the garden, unless it was urgent and they required access sooner. But they still had to provide detail in writing about any work that would be done even within 24 hours. Because of this, I told the letting agent who had communication with T that he would have to ask for access to my garden via them, and I require the written notice as stipulated in my contract. They agreed to pass the message on. Things cooled a bit, but the problem with the drain started again. We could see it was overflowing and apparently T was aware. But we hadn't heard anything from him or the letting agent about when somebody would come and deal with it. This was when I got my own back. I'm probably a bad person for this, but at this stage I had enough. T turned up with the drainage company on a day that I was at home unwell. I was lying on the sofa when I heard a van pull up and somebody try to open the gate, but of course it was locked. The bell went and I considered getting up and answering the door, but when I heard T's voice, I decided I wasn't going to feed his entitlement. I just lay back down, stuck my earplugs in, and tried to go back to sleep. For the next 30 or so minutes he tried to get in, constantly ringing the bell, knocking loudly on my window, shouting into the house, screaming at what I can only assume was my boyfriend on the phone. But I ignored it all. Eventually he got the message and left. When my boyfriend came home from work, he came back to give us a verbal dressing down, threatening legal action again, etc., because he needed access to the property and we didn't provide it. I pointed out that neither of us were in when he turned up, my blinds were shut and nobody can see in, so he didn't know I was off sick, and he didn't give us the agreed notice that he would require access, and in the future I will no longer be dealing with him. If he wants access to go through the letting agent, and the next time I find him in my garden, I'm ringing the police for trespassing. He was still threatening me, so I told him to go for it because I get free legal advice due to a membership I had, and if he really wants to go down that route, be my guest. I've honestly never seen somebody shut up so quickly. He said he'd go through the letting agent in the future, and I said good choice and shut the door in his face. After that, he solely dealt with the letting agent and followed all instructions once he knew I had access to free legal advice. The best part about this whole incident was he could have checked the drain from his own property and never needed access to my garden. He just wanted to flex his muscles and thought he could bully us because we're a young couple. From the comments, his thinking makes no sense. He was contracted and paid to renovate the property by the owner, and he thought that gave him rights to the property long after he was done. He house flipped it. So it was his property, and he renovated it from a shop to a house, selling it afterwards. But honestly, he did a shocking job of it. The place is falling apart. The roof had to be redone before I moved in. There was serious leaking on one wall. He didn't add more windows to allow proper ventilation. He sold the flats behind recently, and they've had to undergo a full rebuild because he also renovated them, and they were in a shockingly bad state of disrepair. I wish he was still around so I could tell him what a shit job he did of my place. Story 2. Entitled Neighbor helped herself to other people's stuff because finders keepers. Several years ago, I heard my sweet neighbor and another woman arguing on the sidewalk. I looked closer and noticed they were both pulling a plant pot in different directions and about to fight. No clue what was up, but knew my neighbor. If she was arguing, she was right. Me and my husband went over to intervene. My husband wanted to help make peace. Me? I was gonna help my neighbor, no questions asked. Why the argument? The other woman was a new neighbor. Our nice neighbor noticed her plant pots were missing and were in the new neighbor's yard. Yep, new neighbor had stolen nice neighbor's plants, plant pots and yard decor and decorated her yard with it. My nice neighbor had hand-painted several pots that were in her yard, thus they were easy to identify as hers. We all walked over to the new neighbor's yard to get our other neighbor's stuff back. When we got to the new neighbor's yard, we noticed several things looked both weird and very familiar. Oh yeah, and the new neighbor had called the cops on us, or at least someone did. Anyway, the new neighbor had planted patches of different types of grass all over the yard in a checkerboard pattern, as well mismatched shrubs and flowers. I looked at our house a little closer. Yep, we were missing grass patches from the side of the house and one of our shrubs. When the police arrived, the new neighbor was adamant the plants, pots, grass, shrubs, and yard decor were hers. She informed the cops she dug them up from other yards in the middle of the night and planted them. Yep, she claimed, finders keepers. Didn't quite work out. My nice neighbor insisted on pressing charges for petty theft and destruction of property. We just dug up our grass patches and replanted them. Some of them even survived it. Nosy neighbors kept walking by after the new neighbor was arrested. As we were digging things up, we explained why to them. Neighbors kept recognizing their stuff from her yard. One neighbor asked if we'd seen a picnic table as his was missing. We hadn't thought to check the backyard. Yep, picnic table and a yard full of her finders keepers haul. She moved pretty much right afterward. We didn't miss her. From the comments, sounds like undiagnosed mental illness. Kleptomania with delusional vegetation entitlement syndrome. Not a doctor trying to guess what it was. You are likely right.